Next part of talking about the dominant accessibility is how do we know what standards we should be following and what the best practices are for knowing that things like ARIA expanded and so on exist? Well, the W3C provides the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And this is the one place where, again, I think that it's an underrated aspect of being a web developer and a software engineer, that knowing that these things exist and knowing how to read them is super useful. The WCAG defines essentially sort of 3 levels of compliance and best practices for accessibility. There's level A, AA, and AAA. And essentially you can think of these things as increasingly stringent requirements for how accessible an application is and in what scenarios you cover. In the United States and most places around the world, the level AA is a legal requirement that publicly accessible websites need to meet. So if we're at Berkeley, every website that Berkeley produces needs to meet these guidelines, or else the university could get in trouble. And in fact, they have in the past. It's a whole thing. But every government website, even public utilities, things that you might not imagine, but businesses, museums, the New York Times, whatever it might be, they also have a requirement by federal accessibility laws to meet these standards. So the WCAG breaks its sort of content down into 4 different factors that you should consider. Is your content perceivable? Which means, can users get the basic information out of it that they need? Is it operatable? Can they navigate? Can they interact with your web page in all the right ways? Is the content understandable? Which is really focusing on things like cognition and clarity of iconography and user interface. And is it robust to various situations? So if we increase the text size of our website such that we're not viewing it just at 100%, but maybe 200, 300, 400% in zoom levels, does our website still make sense? The standards specify how you should think about those things. There's a great intro. The standards, of course, like many things, can be dense, but there's a lot of content that the W3C provides for helping you reason through the various guidelines. So I'm just going to go through some high-level ideas. I'm not going to talk about the specific rules in general about what you need to do, but there's a lot of good stuff in them that when you start to think about just the regular process of building an application, these considerations really do help you build better user interfaces. So just about everything in your application should have some form of text representation. Or in ARIA, there are ways of declaring something presentational. In other words, that this icon is not important. It's just a graphic. It doesn't really enhance, or it doesn't change the needs or usability of a website. But you can imagine, right, if we're using icons like a trash can icon, which looks like a trash can, but doesn't say delete, we would want to provide some text description to that. Of course, if you have audio and video, accessibility standards state that there should be some kind of text transcript available. Again, if at Berkeley, we're probably familiar with most videos that courses produce now having some sort of transcript available. Of course, this is useful if you can't hear the content, but it also turns out that transcripts are useful for doing things like Command F and finding the particular section of a video that you want to get some information out of. Or maybe you just read faster than someone talks and you prefer reading the transcript versus watching the whole thing. And similarly, what I mentioned, right, if we use icons, whether those are frameworks or emoji, typically we want to provide a text alternative such that it's clear what the meaning is of that icon. We're not going to get into it too much in this class, but the colors that you use in your application have a profound effect on the accessibility of the interface. And in some sense, it's kind of obvious, right? We've all seen pages where the font choice, the color choice is just too darn hard to read. And so it makes using the site, much harder. The WCAG provides standards for minimum amounts of contrast that your text should meet. They define these in ratios of sort of lightness to darkness of foreground to background text. And so the standard thing is this contrast ratio of 4.5 to 1 is what you should hit. How it's calculated, it's a little bit complicated. It's not super relevant. It's a kind of odd scale of 1 to 21. But essentially what it's saying is that larger values have more contrast between our foreground and background text. And the really nice thing is the way that this can be calculated is via automated tools. So what I would say that you should know is that there are recommendations like hitting a contrast ratio of 4.5 to 1. But what we'll show in a later video is that Chrome, Safari, bunches of tools automatically do this checking for us. So you don't have to know the formulas. You don't have to sort of memorize what color combinations are good. But the goal is that we really want to provide text which has a high enough contrast. And if you're curious about playing with individual color combinations, there's a whole bunch of tools. One that I really like is contrastratio.com. You just put in 2 color values in whatever format you have them, and it will show you the various scenarios in which that color does or does not meet standard contrast requirements. But people like to make a big deal about this one because on one hand, as a designer, it's something that can be overlooked very easily, but it's also very easy for people to automatically test whether or not you comply with a rule that has an automatable formula. And so it turns out that from a legal perspective, meeting color contrast requirements turns out to be one of the first things that sites get asked to do because it's really incredibly easy to test for in an automated way. Of course, one of the more challenging aspects is interactivity. So this is a place where I'd say it gets tricky quickly. If you don't know that ARIA Expanded exists, how do you ever build a properly functioning menu? How you do this is by relying on other people's work. So there's a fantastic website called the ARIA Authoring Practices Guide. And this is fantastic not just for accessibility, but, and I'll increase the font size here, it provides what it calls design patterns. So design patterns, otherwise a common term as well, but how do I think about things like alerts, navigations? If you've ever used a search bar like this, which pops up different kinds of URLs or links, this thing has a name called a combo box. And there's a lot of standards for how you might handle things like keyboard interactivity or autocomplete. And the really nice thing is that by digging into these, you get a whole bunch of standard descriptions. The vast majority of them actually come with JavaScript code that you can drop into your app. It's all sort of licensed in a free manner, so you don't have to worry about copyright. But the goal is that things that are more than just reading probably need some kind of JavaScript enhancement to be completely accessible to a screen reader. And the authoring practices provide guidelines, not just in terms of, hey, you should write this JavaScript, but in this scenario, here's how you should think about communicating that to the user. So it's great from both a code and design perspective. And again, like all things, don't reinvent the wheel if you don't have to. Leverage the fact that others have spent time building and debugging and testing some of these things. The final thing that I want to highlight around accessibility is that, the question always can be asked, is it good enough? And really what you should be doing is testing with real users in an application, is bringing people into the room, users who have diverse backgrounds, not just blind users to test screen readers, but people with all sorts of different visual impairments, people who have different kinds of devices. Many of us are fortunate to be using fairly recent computers and recent phones, and that's great, or to have access to, well, in this case, the Wi-Fi is continually broken at Berkeley, but fairly robust internet connections. All of these things affect the ability of users to interact with our sites. And so bring them in, have them test your site, or better yet, go to them. Of course, this can always be challenging. And so the other nice thing that we talk about a lot in this class is using automated testing. And so later in the course with the final chips, you'll actually be introduced to a gem called Axe Core, which runs a bunch of automated accessibility tests on web pages, but it's available as a Chrome extension. And Chrome also provides another tool in its developers tools called Google Lighthouse that does some automated testing. So before we actually end that, I have Chrome open. Safari has some built-in accessibility testing and its extensions as well. I really happen to like the Axe and Lighthouse plugins. So, you should test in all of your browsers. But essentially in Google Chrome, if you open the web inspector, there should be a tab by default called Lighthouse. And this is Google's tool that is going to audit not just for accessibility requirements, but things that it calls best practices, page speed, mobile compatibility issues. Of course, it's built by Google, so it has search engine optimization recommendations. But the nice thing here is you can go through, and if you're missing anything, it'll tell you, what perhaps is missing from general accessibility requirements. It gives you a nice guide that there's a lot of things about accessibility that should be manually tested. So as I tab through the page, does that order of navigation make sense using a keyboard? Makes sense, and logical order are things that the spec asks that you do. There's no point, or there's maybe more than no point, but little point in being able to tab through a website where the tab interactions, jump between various elements. It's pretty confusing, but you can't automatically test for confusing. Maybe one day. So, there's a whole bunch of other things that it guides you through testing. This is a really nice interface. The Axe gem does I don't have it actually installed right now in this browser, or logged in at least, I should say. But you can add it to Google Chrome. You can run a similar set of tests. The Axe gem is very detailed in a way that Lighthouse isn't. So sometimes it provides a little bit different feedback. But there's just lots of useful tools out there. So don't try and memorize everything. Rely on the tools to help you out.